Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. And we're here. I was standing here like this, if everybody noticed. And I want to share this with you starting out because I need to do this before I start speaking about assertiveness, because there's a TED Talk, which I'm going to send Nancy the link to because I forgot it, actually, to put it in the PowerPoint. But there's a TED Talk about what happens in your body in terms of cortisol and adrenaline and all the biochemistry of stress in your body versus the biochemistry of what we might say power or reward. That the Superman pose like this, it actually changes the biochemistry of your body. And it's a wonderful TED Talk that's 15 minutes long about what's happening in your body when you do this. And if you need to go into any kind of negotiation or difficult conversation or possible confrontation or speaking to a group of people that you want to give your best game to, actually what she recommends, this neuroscientist, is to stand like Superman for a couple of minutes. So I've taken to doing that, and it'll come back. We'll come back to that. Anyway, it's very interesting. What's the mind-body connection that I don't have the expertise to go into, but just check it out. I can send the link to Nancy if you want it, and it's very, very interesting. And hey, easy, and you just go in the bathroom and do it. Like nobody has to see you doing it. Like I just humiliated myself, and I have no trouble doing that. But what an important topic this is in the context of emotional intelligence, which all these monthly talks have been dealing with, the subsets of roles and the knowledge base and mindset of emotional intelligence comprises all these different categories and dimensions of life. Well, communication, of which assertiveness is all about, is the lubricant in the machinery of all relationships. Without it, everything is stuck. There's just nothing can happen. And I brought something that I think illustrates perfectly a model for what I would call like a high form of assertiveness in a difficult negotiation, just to set it out at the beginning as a model that people can aspire to. I don't know that I could do what this guy did, but that's why I'm sharing it. It's something to learn and grow through. And in keeping with our times, if you watch the Oscars, which I can't not watch, I have to watch, whether you like them or not, because I had to see who wins. I had to stay to the end. And I don't know who was rooting for Les Mis, who was rooting for, oh, you were? Okay, you're rooting for Lincoln. I really thought Lincoln was going to take it, and I was surprised they didn't get Best Director either. But there's a great story about the development of Les Mis as, from Victor Hugo's novel to a musical that was in France. The composer and lyricist are Bulbul and Schoenberg. They're their names. You see their names whenever you see Les Mis. Created this 2-hour musical that was being performed in France. They saw it as something that could become bigger. They saw it as something that theater developers and producers on the West End of London, where really all the really great shows begin, a lot of great shows begin, said we could bring this to the West End and maybe to Broadway. But of course it needs to be translated into English. And they brought it to this composer, lyricist named Herbert Kretzmer. Now, there's a reason we don't see his name on all of the information and billboards and all the things we've been seeing for 30 years about Les Mis, and that's what this story is about. So they brought this 2-hour piece to this guy who speaks both French and English, and he worked with it, and he gave back to them a 3-hour sung-through show that had these phenomenal epic songs, I Dreamed a Dream, Bring Him Home, Empty Chairs at Empty Tables, I Can Hear the People Sing. These were the songs that he put in this show that I think we would not even know about this show were it not for these songs. These songs made it into a musical that we all realize and remember. His name was not anywhere on the West End of London's billboards. It said, translated by. Translated by. He created a full hour of the show, got no credit, and he didn't get the money. I mean, he got paid for his work, and he got no royalties because they just said he didn't do it. They just did. By omission, of course, they took credit for his work, and by omission, he was basically being cheated out of what he was entitled to. So he brought a suit, and what he did was, before he went to a legal confrontation, he met with Cameron McIntosh, who's the producer of Les Mis, and the composer and the lyricist who were listed on the thing, and this is what he said. He said, Cameron McIntosh, if you go ahead with that billing, you have my blessing. But that is the show you do. You do the show by Boubille and Schoenberg. It'll be a 2-hour show, and it'll be in French. And with that, he staked his claim. That was assertive. It was making an argument all at once, and he was also throwing down, he was really kind of setting a boundary. You can't use my work without giving me credit for my work, but go ahead. Do the version that you had without me. You're free to do that. They're still working this out. That's why we never heard of Herbert Kretzmer, and that's why the piece is in the New Yorker, because it's now being played out in litigation, because this is a million, gazillion dollar production. Well, there's many things about theater, which is a world that I know more about than I know about science, but I know about teams, because that's the work that I do. And that is that in both theater and in science, you have people bringing their best game to a collaborative effort that nobody really knows the outcome of. No one knows what the outcome will be. Nobody knows whether the grant will get funded. You're doing your best work with really no predictable outcome. So there's a lot there's ways to examine using theater what you guys live often in your life day to day, or what anybody on teams that's trying to get something done. A project team, a grant writing team, and also the team that is your family, that is friendships, that is the network of people that we engage with all the time. That what this guy did was this, in this format, in this presentation, is saying, this is what I want. This is what I want. I want credit for my work. I will not allow you to use my work unless I get credit for it. And by doing that, he engaged the other person in like a really worthy fight. That's a high stakes, worthy fight. There are times when we back down from those fights, and that's what this talk is really about. Why it's important why it's important sometimes to engage in those kinds of conflicts, and what we would call an emotionally intelligent way to go about it. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about, different communication styles, which are sometimes temperament styles and maybe an interpersonal style in general. Some people are shy. You could range from shy to very outgoing, and still not necessarily, a person could be very outgoing and still not very assertive, because it's really about ruffling other people's feathers a little bit, or it could be about rocking the boat or changing the dynamic in a way that feels uncomfortable, but yet is important to do. We'll describe how assertiveness is different from aggressiveness and why that's an important distinction. We're going to discuss assertive communication within the frame of emotional intelligence, how it fits within that mindset or that knowledge base, and then some practices for how you can apply this in daily life. Now, all human interactions involve some degree of interaction. And all human interactions involve some degree of negotiation, whether that's getting the kids in bed, getting the secretary to do something exactly how you want them to do it, working with team. All human interactions, friendships too, involve some kind of negotiation. Some of them go very easily and flow because the people are a good match. People understand each other. You work with people a long time. Sometimes there's a shorthand that you have with each other. And also, there's a skill set. If that's not happening, there's a skill set that we can learn that fosters a greater flow in those kinds of negotiations. But this cartoon is sort of apropos of this topic, because sometimes we think when we're being assertive that if we haven't been assertive in our lives, that it's kind of an all or nothing proposition. I've never asked for what I want, and now I'm going to insist on what I want. Or someone hears it. If we say, I just asked you to take out the garbage, and the person says, well, you can't change me. You don't have the right to try and change me. And sometimes that's the answer. I'm not trying to change you. I'm asking you to give me, to work with me. But people will hear it in a way that then you have to break that down. What did I say that made you think I want you to change your spots? You'll never change your spots. And the thing is, interpersonal relationships are an ongoing negotiation over things that really matter to us, like our personal space, how we use our time, mutual resources, things that everybody has a stake in. And when we look at studies, and here's one here in the International Journal of Conflict Management, that when there is a positive emotional tone in groups, and that takes a bit of work to do, whether that's a family or a work team, it takes effort for there to be a consistent emotional tone in groups. Why? Because life is hard and things come at us, and we can be reactive in ways that of which we're not even really aware. We could be thinking we're entirely right and really creating tension in a group, and the group needs to have that lubrication of good communication in order for us to be able to address those things. That can keep the goodwill in a group very high if we could talk about anything. If we could build that up so where a group can really talk about anything. And when there is a positive emotional tone in groups, this study in this journal says there was an increase in concession making, people more willing to give a little bit up for the good of the group or for the good of someone else. Sometimes it's just in the way something is presented that we're willing to give a little bit up. It stimulates creative problem solving, one reason being when there's safety in a group. When a group has that emotional tone of I could be myself and I'm listening to you, we're more free to put out ideas that are perhaps risky, that are out of the box, that are different, and not without fear that we'll be shot down. That's when it takes some effort, but everybody putting conscious effort into slowing down our reactions makes a group a safer place, and then more ideas are going to bubble up because you'll just be more free to express yourself. And of course, it increases preferences for cooperation, as it goes with the other two. So when we talk about what is assertiveness, we're really talking about a category of being that involves standing up for and expressing what we want and what's important to us. Now, this includes, but is not limited to, you could certainly add things to this list of the kinds of things that really people very deeply care about and might feel invested in standing up for and expressing themselves and maybe putting themselves out there a little bit. Well, of course, when I want a situation to change, that could be one. I don't like the way this is going. I want you to take the garbage out, and you keep saying I want to change your spots, and I just want you to take the garbage out, and I just want us to be able to talk about that. Or we want something to get better or something to end that's happening that is dysfunctional or troubling. We want respect, power, and personal autonomy. We want to be able to frame and define our own identity, and that can change over the life of a group. I mean, when you're raising kids, that's part of the life of a child is to say, you treat me like I'm a baby, you don't think I'm grown up, and you're saying, you're not grown up, what are you kidding me? But they're shaping their identity. They're shaping their identity off of us, off of the limits that we set and the structures that we create. And within groups, people can grow and you can tolerate something for a while, and then after a period of time, you can grow and say, this doesn't work for me anymore, and it can upset the whole thing. And that kind of, the desire for power and personal autonomy can really, really reset an entire dynamic in a group, and that not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be very difficult. Just speaking of this, okay, I wanted to bring this up at the beginning, and I'm just going to touch base on this because I'm going to come back to it. But, in the works of Shakespeare, what scholars say, he's been studied by so many philosophers and great writers, that in the works of Shakespeare is contained all of human experience. That if you read all the plays and the sonnets, that all of the dynamics of human experience are described and explored within his work. And so some people maintain that Shakespeare was not one man, that Shakespeare was a collective of playwrights, whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's in that, I'm going to call him a him because I kind of think it was just him. But there are a number of Shakespeare plays. One is Twelfth Night, The Merchant of Venice. Those are two that I can think of quickly, where there are women take on the role of a man in order to get something done. In Twelfth Night, she's a woman who comes on, she's been separated from her twin, her identical, well, not identical twin, he's a boy, she's a girl, but she's been separated from her twin by a shipwreck, and she comes to an island, but she can only really get her needs met by pretending to be a guy, a young guy, and she takes on a job as an assistant to this count or something, who thinks she's a guy, and she fakes being a guy so she can have a job, so she can have mobility, so she can have autonomy. That's the only way she can have that in the frame of that culture. And of course, she falls in love with him, and he's in love with someone else, and he sends her on a journey to go and tell the woman he's in love with that he's in love with her, so she's in love with him, reporting to someone else that he's in love with her, and it's just hilarious. But it is. It's actually, I mean, all this farce and mistaken identity. But there's a number of plays like that are involved. Someone has to hide their true identity in order to get around, in order to make something happen in their life. There are almost always women in that scenario. The Merchant of Venice, she's she fakes being a lawyer to get her fiancé off so they don't take a pound of flesh from him. And she succeeds, but no one could possibly believe that she's a woman in the end, but she's a woman who thinks for herself. And I say that because, one, I think Shakespeare, there's a great way to look at how much context and a cultural reality shapes people's choices, that's a very assertive thing to do, to work within the context of, if you declare yourself to be a woman and dress as a woman in those plays, one, there would be no story, there would be no tension, there'd be no drama, because the person's doing what they're expected to do. But it tells a story about what's necessary sometimes to get what you want. You have to really work within the context that you're given. We don't get to control that. We can gradually sometimes try to change it from within. And those stories kind of show us a boundary-breaking person that succeeds in getting something that they want, and then in the end, Viola finds out that he does love her, but he thinks she's a guy, so what does that mean? So that he has to question himself, but then she says, but see, I'm a woman, and like a lot of great romantic comedies, they end up together. But the social commentary is very powerful, and this is also true in many, many different ways in our lives, where it's not so cut and dry that you're faking your gender in order to get what you want, but there are ways in which you can you can just plain out tell the truth in order to get something done, and there are times when you have to play a role to get something done. And if you have to play the role to get something done in the service of something, that's, is that a lie, or is that it's playing a role? It's working within the game. Like, well, how is the game in this particular context? What has to be done? And so I'm just saying, like, this is a finessing of your role and of reality, because we say, if you said, well, I can't lie or I can't misrepresent myself, well, you can work it, if you know what I mean. You can speak the language of people the way they understand it. So there's a little bit more on that in the rest of this. Because identity for Viola in Twelfth Night is internal. It's not external. It's in herself. I know who I am. I know my struggle. I know I'm in love with this guy. I know he thinks I'm a guy. I know he thinks I'm his best friend. I'm going to have to tell this woman he loves her. And if she falls in love with him, I'm out. And I have to take that risk. But she knows who she is. And that's the important thing. And emotional intelligence is the expression of that internal knowing of we shape our own identity. And we also operate within a context where we sometimes have to respect those boundaries in order to break them. First, you have to get in there. And there's a slide going forward that explains that more clearly. Of course, assertiveness involves reaching goals. Sometimes it involves winning. And there's nothing wrong with winning. if that's what we need, if that's, sometimes it involves putting yourself out there in order to win, whether that happens or not. It's the skill that gets you there. It can involve getting help and support, and of course, the attempt to be understood. Now, emotional intelligence is directly linked to the ability to be assertive and negotiate with others. And this study talked about what smart managers know. This was talking about management and the assertiveness. Now, if you imagine, there's an exercise that we do in experiential workshops that I just want you to use your imagination just for the purpose of this next discussion. We would often, if we're doing like a long 3 or 4 hour workshop with a group or with a team, we might do something like this. Let's say that end of the room is 0, and that end of the room is 100. And 0 means I have absolutely no skill at this, or no interest in this, or I'm no good at this, or a big fat no to the question. And over that wall would be 100% yes, I'm really good at this, or a great big yes to the question. And if a group is really stuck, we would sometimes say, okay, so 0 would be there, and then there's this continuum. It's called a spectrogram. So there's a continuum of truth, like from absolutely no to, yeah, well, I'm kind of right down the middle. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, to yes, 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 big time yes. And you ask a series of questions, and people who say, well, we can't talk in this group. We cannot talk to each other. We're stuck. And I've worked with these groups that said that. We don't look at each other. We don't talk to each other. And so I could make the claim at the beginning of the group saying, you will understand each other better in the next 10 minutes. No, I will not, because they don't understand me. Anyway, so what we do is say, how do you feel about chocolate ice cream? I hate chocolate ice cream. I love chocolate ice cream. And just get up from your chair and go stand on that line somewhere that you are. And then we get into little richer questions. How important it is, how good are you at expressing what you need and want? I'm very good at expressing what I need and want. I'd be over there. Well, sometimes, it depends. It depends on the situation. I can never ask for what I need and want. And by the position that someone takes along that spectrogram, you know a lot about that person. You know a lot about that person. Then you might say, well, how willing am I in this group? 0 willing, very willing, to work at our communication standoff. How willing am I? If you have a whole group of people down there, well, at least everybody knows where everybody stands. Everybody knows we're not willing. But then my job, of course, is to break that down and say, is that a problem of willingness, or is that a problem of competence that I don't know how? Because if you already had a lot of people saying, I can't, I'm not good at asking for what I want, then you know the problem might be a problem of competence. It might be a problem of skills. It might be a problem of trust. It could be that this group needs to, that there's too many external friendships or alliances. There's a couple of alliances outside the workplace, and then in the workplace, this creates some tensions because the people that are not in those friendships don't trust those people. But once that gets revealed, a lot of work can be done. So I would say it's kind of an assessment tool to use for yourself to say, where would I be? Would I say, sometimes I can ask for what I want and negotiate and make a claim and make a stand like this guy from Les Mis. You can use the play, but not my work. Sometimes I can do that depending on the issue. Or I always do it. I can always do it. Whether or not it goes well, I can always do it. And also, how aggressive do I express myself? Now, there's another exercise you could do where you can say, where we can ask ourselves, what do other people say about me? And what do other people say that I speak up? Do other people say that I'm pushy? Do other people say I push for the right reasons? That's when a group is trusting, but you can ask a few trusting people. Like, where would I be on that spectrogram? Do I ask for what I need? Do I demand what I need? Or do I just never speak up? And all those different styles reflect back on personality. But they can all be learned. Like, you can learn to be more forthright, and you can also learn to kind of hold back, given a situation or a group of people where the message is not being received. So we have to be creative about how we put it out there. So the research says, this study shows that an emotionally intelligent manager and, of course, team member and parent chooses battles wisely. Not every battle has to be fought. We can be aware of it and say, not the right time. Or, this is not a hill I want to die on. This is, there are other smaller things maybe that we could work on that would, that might develop the trust where we could take that on. Or some battles are not wise to fight. A good manager or a good team member or a good parent takes a stand when necessary and is flexible when necessary. Kind of like standing in the middle of the spectrogram. Like if you're telling me, do I ever take back a punishment to my kid? Yes, I sometimes do. And then there are other times, but there are things about which I'm completely firm, and I would not waver. If you display the courage to confront sticky situations with confidence as a manager or anybody who's more or less in charge of a group or could take the leadership role, it definitely empowers other people if somebody is willing to confront a sticky situation and say, I'm not afraid of those tensions. So the idea would be to confront sticky situations and take them on without creating enemies or damaging anybody. That's where the skills come in. That's where the self-awareness comes in, right? So this study showed that there is this inverse relationship, that all of these skills can go too far. In other words, too passive of a boss that's too much of a, yeah, sure, you can have time off to everybody, wants to be a nice guy, wants everybody to like them. That can be great, and it can be grating. And then the other way, which a boss that fights for everything and fights with everybody could be, a powerful person that no one likes and everyone's intimidated by. And that this high shape of the U are the people with the highest developed what we call emotional intelligence. The willing to choose battles wisely, to fight for the group when necessary, to keep battles within the group, within a contained kind of conversation where people work it out together before you kick it upstairs if you have to. To show kindness and compassion and at the same time have good boundaries, that's at the high point of that use. So this study showed a direct relationship between developing those skills and leadership skills. So this is 4 styles, very basic, but kind of a good frame to think about it. So if you're using the example of someone standing on your foot, the passive person would sigh, maybe, I wish that person would get off my foot. Just, it hurts, but say nothing and just hope. Fingers crossed that this person will get off my foot very soon. An aggressive person doesn't say, excuse me, you're standing on my foot. The aggressive person, will sock you in the jaw to get you off your foot. You get off my foot, but they might hurt you in the process. A passive-aggressive person will say nothing, wait for the situation to pass, and a week is later, and you're sitting at your desk, and they come over and they just step on your foot, and you don't know why, you don't know where it came from, or they hit you from behind, or they tell someone else to go and step on your foot, and you don't know why. But they'll get back at you, and you won't see it coming, and it won't seem related to the incident. That's the hardest thing about it, is that it won't seem related to the incident where someone stepped on your foot. And of course, an assertive person gets the courage to say, no matter who this person is, and that's why I use the Shakespearean example, because if there are power structures, and there are power structures in all of human dynamics for all of time, so we can look at them through many different lenses, and one of them is theater and plays, where you could see the power structure and how it influences people's choices. Because, in Office Space, in the movie Office Space, and he gets hypnotized and he doesn't care anymore that everybody's telling him to come in on Saturday. He just sleeps right through Saturday. But until he's hypnotized, he's scared to death every time that boss comes around. And the guy's the most passive guy in this movie, just drinking a cup of coffee. But everybody hides and runs from him because he's going to ask you to do a thing that you don't want to do. And an assertive person would say, you're not paying me extra to come in on Saturday, for example. I'll negotiate with you, but I just think that, better planning on your part, and I might not have to come in on Saturday. Or give us the reasons why. Fill us in. Don't treat us like You know, like we're the underlings that don't get to know what's the inside story? How come we all have to work an extra day? Instead, everybody runs and hides, and he lords it over everyone. And the end. You know what movie I'm talking about? Office Space. Okay, you should definitely see this movie, just because it's about corporate culture, but it's very, very funny. But it's got a good message too. But assertiveness would mean, you know, speaking up in a way that addresses the issue, but is not assaultive. We don't have to assault the other person. We don't have to insult the other person. And the thing that's tough about it, in my experience as a therapist, I would say, when I was doing individual therapy and group therapy for 20 years and just seeing thousands of people over a lot of time, is it is very hard to overcome certain power differentials that we grew up with. If we all went to a school that had powerful teachers and a powerful hierarchy of structure, we got very socialized in a way that tells us where we sort of are always assessing where we are in that hierarchy all the time in an automatic kind of way, because our brain really adapted to that. That's what feels normal, is where am I in this hierarchy? And there's a reality to it. There could be wonderful people at the top of that hierarchy, but we might still be intimidated. So if they're standing on our foot, it might be a tremendous force of will that it requires to say, excuse me, that's my foot, and I would like you to get your foot, I would like you to get your foot off my foot. You could see why somebody might be intimidated to do that. But that's a different skill set than if it's a friend or a peer or somebody who is not where there's power involved. But I do think that it's, in terms of self-awareness and emotional intelligence, is all about self-regulation and self-awareness, recognizing kind of how do we assess situations before we speak up. Because if somebody does cross a boundary with you, and that's what the stepping on your foot is, could be any form of crossing a boundary that we all experience in various ways. What kind of battle is this? What's it going to require of me? And how to frame it so that the other person can hear it. That's the power that we have. So we look at the situation, we assess what is happening, and mainly, what do I want? If you could say, I want this person to get off my foot. This guy is saying, I want this Les Mis composer and lyricist is saying, I want my name in all the credits for Les Miserables in the movie and the film. And they actually added a song for the film that he wrote completely, and they did perform it on the Oscars, so good for him. But he didn't get, I don't know, it wasn't mentioned anywhere. I just happen to know that. But so if you know what you want, then it helps to frame an argument if you know what you want. We try to arrange, and how am I feeling about this? Sometimes can be part of the conversation, and sometimes it's just for self-awareness. Like if you feel really heated up about something, it's a professional situation. You might not want the heat to come out. You might want to really rehearse an argument or an assertion that is not very emotional at all, even though your emotions might be very high, because it'll be a more empowered and thought-out argument than if we come from an emotional place. And what are my rights in this situation? It's best to do what we call assertive communication or any kind of negotiation. It's best to do it face-to-face. It's worse to do it via text, which we all probably know, but people still do have lots of negotiations via text. And email is a close second. Email is okay. It's still dicey because the tone and the wording, unless you're a really, really great writer. I mean, a lot of you guys are probably very good writers. I'm just, we all are aware of there's a certain miscalculation that you can go into an email that you don't know until it's already out there. And send! Oh no, I shouldn't have hit send. But yeah, so if you can arrange to do something face-to-face, because there's a body language piece, there's the inner Superman piece that you can develop before you go into it. We define the issue using I statements, how this affects me, what I want, this is my perception of things. And express what we want. And what's not here, but I think is important, is to really be open to listening once we make our case, that a real negotiation involves as much listening as it does asserting ourselves. We actually have a whole workshop on that in March, on listening. So, well, it is March, but later in the month. So this writer, this guy did a lot of research on assertiveness and aggressiveness and the relationship of that. And he says there's a sweet spot for assertiveness. If you're below the range, you're not going to get what you want because it won't come out clearly because people will overwhelm you or we just won't make enough of a stand. If you're above that spot, then you'll be kind of labeled as an aggressive person that doesn't get along with others and that is demanding. It's a good article to read, by the way. That goes into that in a lot more detail than we have time for today. So the art of the argument is worth describing. The arguments are part of all negotiations, and arguments are good things. Arguments, I don't know if that's a hot word for you. For some people, argument means people aren't getting along and it's not all right. It's great. It's great. It's how you express what your position is. And a healthy argument might mean there's a lot of disagreement. An assertive argument is going to be a healthy exchange of ideas. It will not be personal attacks. It will not be usurping other people's resources or stepping on anybody's boundaries. Real conflict is a very healthy thing because we're actually listening and learning from each other. And so here's how we characterize it. An assertive argument, there's low emotional arousal. So it could be that something emotional drives you to the place where you say, I really, really have to have this out with this person. I have to discuss this. My emotions are very high. And when you know that, that means it's been building for a while, it's happened over and over, things like this. But those things I'm a strong believer in, and I actually practiced this myself for many years, is write it down, have a journal, write all, if there's a resentment to it, if there's a sense of injustice that's highly emotional, write it down without censoring any of what you really feel has happened to you. And write it a few times. Then write it in a letter. Write it as if you're writing a letter to this person, describing what has occurred before you ever say a word. Because if you do that, and you'll go back, just like any other good piece of writing, you'll edit out a lot of things that aren't necessary for the other person to know. They're only our own process. This has happened to me all my life. I always get stepped on. I get taken advantage of, and I've had it. That may be true. It may be true. But in that negotiation, that past, that what we bring to it may disempower us rather than empower us. It's not a strong argument for what we want. If I want respect in a situation, it's how we present that argument. But that emotional arousal can be dealt with, through talking to a couple of friends, and it's a great skill to use letter writing that you don't send. Then in the strategies of a healthy, argument are clarifying information, sharing information, clarifying points, clarifying what my role is. I see my role this way. This has been asked of me. This is my problem with that, and this is what I'd like to see different. How do you see it? So clarification, sharing of information that may not have been, that may be hidden or that may not have been discussed openly or needs to be reinforced, and boundary setting. So a healthy argument is kind of like what this composer is saying. You can use the play that you have in French without my music. Good luck with you, to you, and you have my blessing on that. And that's a very healthy boundary. He's saying, this is as far as I will go. And this is what I want. I want you to meet me halfway here. An aggressive exchange is going to be characterized by a high degree of emotional arousal. Well, we know what that's like. That's where, there's real anger, or there's accusations or threats. Or there's generalizations. You always do this. There's a lot of good examples, but I don't want to. Yeah, there's a lot, but we know what that's like. But it feels like an unsafe conversation. It feels like everybody's kind of out on a limb. Those reactive emotions, once they get triggered, you can be defending yourself and still sound like an aggressive person because you're feeling attacked yourself. And the attack and defense strategies will be that will be what we call an aggressive confrontation. someone ends up apologizing. That's what always happens. Someone ends up apologizing, and someone ends up saying, I'm always the one that ends up apologizing. There's just another way to do things. I mean, people who work together, I have some friends that work at Stony Brook, and they are a very, very tight department. It's a major that the full-time staff is like, they will really go to the mats for each other. But sometimes, because they're like a family and they've worked together for so many years, and there's so much at stake, so many jobs, so many students' lives, the whole life of the program, as you know, sometimes in university settings, people are fighting for the life of their program all the time because somebody's going to cut their funding for a political reason, and that's what's going to happen. And so sometimes within that small group of 6 to 8 people, it gets to be like a family, and a little too close, and if there's a threat within that group, people will start this kind of aggressive conversation that doesn't feel like a work situation. It feels like a dysfunctional family in that moment. We'll get through it. You can get through it. We're just using this as a way of understanding why that is. It's a harder walk back than a thought through, fully conscious, emotionally intelligent conversation. It's not really that we're ever going to escape having those kind of reactive conversations. I don't think that's realistic, but we can work at this. So there is this study about understanding aggressive communication that what they call, they call this constructive predispositions. That doesn't mean you're born with it. It might mean that you had a family that that built up your self-esteem, that built up your sense of confidence, or various experiences that you sought out in your own life that predisposes you to these kinds of qualities. That if you're able to make a healthy argument and assert yourself, that you will be seen as credible, eloquent, creative, self-assured, and likely to be viewed as a leader. Whether or not you have the actual position of a leader within a group, you will be viewed as somebody who speaks up, who stands out, in a very positive way. So they call that a constructive predisposition toward assertiveness. Now, research in the discipline of communication, and this is, as everything, it's studied now and researched, and social psychologists and neuroscientists look at all these things and what's happening within us, that the discipline of communication advocates both assertiveness and the ability to argue, that these two things work well together in order to get these characteristics, and what I would link that together to be emotional intelligence. Now, if you know the story of the Endurance, and I have a kind of preoccupation with things that I would never do in my life, which are climb the Himalayas or go to the Antarctica or any place really cold or even ski. But those kinds of things where you're cold and uncomfortable, not my thing, but I like to read about them, and I admire people very much who do them. Well, this was, I don't know that this has been verified, but there is some literature that say this is an ad that Ernest Shackleton took out when he wanted to do this expedition to Antarctica. Men wanted for hazardous journeys, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. So we really laid it out there. This is a really high-risk thing we're going to do. You may not survive it. It's going to be hell. Who's in? And he got the funding, and he got this ship. And if you know the story of the Endurance, it was an aptly named ship that got locked in the ice in Antarctica for a year. They lived on this boat, him and his crew of 28 people. Then they had to abandon the boat because the ice began to crush the boat. So they had to get off and live on the ice, 28 men and their leader. Then they had to go find, and he eventually got them onto an island that was still ice covered, and he took off with somebody to get help. They all survived. No one committed suicide. Nobody turned on anybody because of his style. This is the truth, this is the truth, but he kept people going, and I thought, what a name for that ship, because these people endured 2 years where many people would just give up. And there are lots of expeditions to Antarctica where everybody died. Almost all of them that I read. I haven't read, absolutely every Antarctica or Arctic Circle venture, but there are many where, especially in his time, before technology, where everybody died. He didn't lose anybody. There's something about that kind of leadership that this is getting at. That when you can persuade people to do the most impossible thing. Keep going, stick together. They played games. They created games that they played together. They wrote, they journaled, they did all kinds of things. And he kept their spirits going and he saved their lives. And so they were all hailed as heroes because of, in many ways, because of his leadership. And so these characteristics, personal dominance, firmness, forcefulness, and proactive behavior to achieve personal goals, he modeled these things, and so these people survived. It's just a great model for us, for anybody, to think about a way to be in dealing with obstacles. Because they could have all just whined and complained, and he would have said, I don't know if he would have succeeded, but anyway, you can find that online. I did. Now, I use this because there's a famous shot that we all know what this was about. All argument is assertive, but not all assertiveness is an argument. And this was a great moment. And for one reason being, these experiential techniques I'm talking about, with like the spectrogram where people don't have to speak, but you just get up and take a stand and so forth. Well, there's a famous one that's called the empty chair that we use in psychotherapy and we use in experiential work. And in the empty chair, you really literally put an empty chair on the stage. I don't know if that's where he was coming from with this, because it's an acting technique as well. And you put someone in the chair, and you speak to them. And you imagine them there, and you imagine what it would feel like to really be with them. And then often what we do when we use this technique is if I'm having a conflict with a friend, and I put that person in the empty chair, and I say what I need to say to them, the next step would be I would go and sit in the chair and respond as that other person. That's a little bit what was missing from this one. It was a one-sided argument, but it was a strong assertion of what he wanted to say. And when you have an empty chair, you can do that. And to make an argument, and where in that case the other person is not present to argue back, but that's okay. But that technique is a very powerful technique, to talk to an empty chair and then take the role of the other person in response to yourself and go back and forth like that. Now, all negotiation and communication is happening over some kind of barrier. Even the best of friends or closest of partners, there's some kind of barrier. There's our frame and the structures through which we see the world and how we see ourselves. We don't know what's going on even in someone else's thinking unless they tell us, honestly. And so some of the things, the barriers that we are overcoming involve role disparity, as we were talking about. For example, in Shakespeare's play, where a woman has to pretend to be a man to get anything to happen for herself that isn't controlled by everybody else. And we can find ourselves with a role disparity in many different places and relationships in the world. And it's just important to recognize how that affects us. How does that affect the way I feel? How does that affect how much I feel like I can be myself? How does it affect what I'm willing to show of myself? It's just self-awareness piece to be aware of. Our frame of reference can interfere with communication, assertive communication. Cultural differences, moods and emotions unrelated to the present moment, as we were talking about with passive-aggressive people, for example. But I'm not just saying that's only passive-aggressive people. We can all have a buildup of emotion about something that we're just really not fully aware of, and it comes out in a strong reaction to something that sometimes is very unexpected. It's all just grist for the mill to know ourselves and say, wow, well, that really hit me, and now I have to look at that. And of course, issues of timing. Well, we're going to go through that. Is it a good time? There's another slide that gets into that a little bit more. But there are better and worse times to bring things up. When somebody's tired, if you know they're tired, is that the time to ask for something that you really want? If somebody's really hungry, is that the time to ask? There are things we can be aware of. And emotional intelligence involves this finessing of reality, where we take in sort of the nuances of the world and respond to them while still standing up for what we want. Because it actually maximizes the chances of you getting more what you want. Sometimes the barrier to negotiation is the aggressive behavior of another person, that it just simply feels like I cannot negotiate because there's hostility, there's just negativity, there's a block, I have resentment toward that person, or they express nothing but resentment towards me. There's suspicion of my motives if I bring something in. There's an assault on your self-concept. An attack on you based on things that have that are personal, that have nothing to do with the argument at hand. And so that kind of exchange is not going to be much of a negotiation. That's going to be sometimes a run for cover. We'll tend to withdraw, and it's quite uncomfortable. So these are the kinds of communication, the expression of communication we might experience. Someone will say, you're a loser, you're incompetent, you don't know what you're doing, how could you even come to me with this kind of a complaint, or you got it in for me, you're doing a performance review of someone and you need to give them some kind of feedback about their performance, and they say, you've never liked me, you've always got it in for me, you like that other person. Well, that shuts everything down if that's not really what the argument is supposed to be about, and the person is bringing something personal into it. If someone's distorting what you say or do, and when that's happening. Now, we're listing these things to say, okay, these are expressions of aggressive communication. It's good to know that. And sometimes there's responses and things you can do in response to that. And sometimes all you can do is just understand it, that's happening. And so my best game, my most eloquent argument is not going to be heard, and it's not you. You know what I mean? Like that, sometimes it's not you. It's that this is an environment where you will just simply cannot be heard. And it's just good to know that so you don't take it personally or try to fight, throw yourself at a closed door. Teasing, ridicule, threats, negative comparisons, mocking behavior, these kinds of things are a signal that there's hostility and these are forms of aggressive communication. Sometimes, if you say, did you just roll your eyes at me? Or are you really looking at me like that? Sometimes if you just say that in a lighthearted way, someone might say, oh, I'm sorry, did I roll my eyes? And it so takes someone back. It just sort of, that it shows that their attitude is kind of showing that you might get a little bit more done in that conversation just by saying, but it doesn't have to be, it's healthier. I think it's easy, it goes easier if it's a little more playful. Like, I don't know what to say to that, to this, the eye roll, and there are times when that's not going to be met with anything but an icy stare. But the idea is that you tried, you put it out there. Okay. When speaking up about what we want, it is what we say and how we say it. Now, sometimes that aggressive behavior that we just saw, like mocking, eye-rolling, sarcasm, shutting it down in various kinds of ways, sometimes that's happening because a person just doesn't have very good sense of how to do it better out of a lack of skill. I mean, that's why teenagers famously do those kinds of things. They just don't they can't fight back any other way. They don't have the skill, and they don't have the emotional self-regulation that adults might have. So a lot of these highly reactive things, and they just don't really have a good argument. They've lost, and they still want to let you know that it's not okay with them that they lost, as an example. But, I mean, just because we're adults in adult bodies doesn't mean that we have developed this skill. This is something to work on. It's not something that came naturally to me. I went to Catholic school, enough said. I just did what I was told. And so to violate that, and by violate it means saying, I'm not happy with this situation, or I would like to be paid more, or things like that. Very uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. So looking at it as a skill development and not as a personal deficiency that helped me an awful lot to frame it that way. But sometimes if a person lacks competence, they just won't be very good at this. And so you might be met with some of that hostility, and that's the reason why. It's just to think about it that way rather than take it personally. Sometimes the other person's argument is not well thought out. It's just the way I said so because I was told this, and they don't really have a good argument for it. So they can just be dismissive of you because they don't really have a good argument for it. Sometimes people believe that there are tensions underlying, as I've worked with some of these groups, we will never get through them. We will never, ever be able to forgive each other for what has taken place. And with that, there will be much more of this kind of dismissive behavior toward each other. Sometimes the things can't be remediated, but that doesn't mean, that may be just what people believe. Beliefs can change. And of course, passive-aggressive behavior that's gone unacknowledged, will sometimes produce this kind of aggressive responses. But I love this picture because now this role reversal thing that I'm describing, like talking to an empty chair or imagining someone else's take on what you're saying, this is what these people did. They needed the panda to get in the box. Why would a panda get in a box? What's in it for him? But they acted like pandas, and they looked like pandas, and the panda worked with them. Well, this is what I'm saying about role reversal, or imagine writing a letter to the person you're having trouble with and then responding to that letter, and really try to see the situation from the boss's point of view or your colleague's point of view, so that you could be a panda. If they're a panda, try to be a panda. What does a panda need and want? That's how we persuade somebody to get more of what we want, is to try to get that, to see how might they see that request. So emotions are not something that we marginalize. We become aware of them, but you can actually integrate them into your argument. You can have an impassioned argument that deals with emotions, not that we want to be aware of them and then put them to the side. That's the beauty of emotional intelligence, is that it accommodates the idea that all of human interaction involves exchange of energy, emotional reactions to each other. We all have a history. We all have a story that we bring to the various sides of what's happening with each other, and we integrate that. So a wise negotiator understands that managing emotions means more than identifying them and then just saying, that makes me angry, or I don't like when that happens, or I'm fearful, I'm afraid. No, it means just like star athletes who are in the zone, we're centered, we're energized, and resilient in the face of strong feelings. And mainly it means that we take responsibility for those feelings. Even if we say, well, the world is triggering this in me, it's still my emotion. And my emotion is within my control. I can manage it, I can take responsibility for it, I can talk to people about it in a healthy way where I stand up for myself. Even if I say, I don't want to have this feeling. I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't want to have this feeling. I have it. It's telling me something. It could be telling me I don't feel like I have status in this place. I don't feel like I have the status that some of my peers have. That could be an internal perception that other people don't share, but we bring to that situation from our own history. Talking about that can change it. It can change that feeling. Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize emotions and understand how they operate, and also the ability to manipulate and change them. We change them by acknowledging them, by working them through. And if I have emotional intelligence, I know what's the right time to talk to my boss. I know my new partner just had a terrible flight and lost their luggage, and this is not the time they're not going to be receptive to what I'm saying, so I shouldn't make a pitch right now. If I know that, if I take them to this restaurant or buy tickets to this race, I can shift their emotional state to feel more gratitude toward me and listening to me. That's actually from a sales thing. So that's one of the sales pitches. Drug reps they bring in pizza to the healthcare facilities. They bring in all this great food, really, really unhealthy food too. But it's like a party, and the drug rep is here, and then they leave samples of antidepressants, and it definitely makes a bond, to that product, to that experience. And we're really kind of always doing that. We're doing that, and so there's an emotionally intelligent approach to persuasion and assertion and making an argument, of course, is to provide an experience with another person that takes into look for what the panda wants. Like, how can I match what's going on for them? And everything can wait if it's worth your effort to bring something to someone's attention. It's definitely can wait to the right time, because bad timing can ruin the whole thing. So one strategy that the Harvard Business Review recommends is this. You go into an interaction and you say, I'm just going to go in as an observer of myself. This is one of those meetings where I just never feel like I get across what I want to say, or I sit there quietly, or I say too much and then I'm sorry about it. Go in there as an observer and go in there asking myself, what do I really want from this situation? because that can change, but you could identify something you want, and how do I want to express that? How am I going to express it? Whether you can achieve that within one meeting doesn't matter. What do I want, and how do I think that expressing it will improve my situation? Like, I'd like you to get off my foot. Of course, we know then we're free of pain, but there are more complex things, not so black and white, that are important to express. Then after the meeting, you do like an inventory and say, what were my strategies, and when did I hold back? That's always the big question. When did I hold back, and why did I hold back? There's a lot in that question. Was it that that person is someone that I don't want to upset? Is that I feel bad for that person? I want that person to like me. All of those are just human dynamics that go on, in all kinds of interactions that affect whether we may ask for what we want, and then some dissatisfaction and resentments that can grow from that. What they suggest is if you put something out there that you want, something you want to change, something that you want to make happen, and it's successful or not successful, just change it. Just use that as a guide to change what works in this situation. Now, they suggest rehearse what to say and how to say it. Rehearse with a friend, or rehearse it out loud in your car. Rehearse it like lines in a play. Especially if it's an unfamiliar role, and it's even if the group is the most receptive, wonderful group, it can still be an uncomfortable thing to do to put something out there. So it helps to rehearse it and kind of edit it and make sure that what's being and hear yourself saying those words. I use the iPhone app, the little microphone that on your iPhone. If you have an iPhone, it has a little voice memo. The voice memo, to hear myself say something important, because how it sounds in my head and how it sounds when I listen to it are often very different things. And so that's a self-awareness tool. Just listen to how it sounds, and then hone it, shape it how you want it to be. If assertiveness in this way and create an argument is a little bit of a challenge, then what they suggest is set a goal for yourself, like just to go beyond the limits of your comfort, just a little bit. So it might mean starting a conversation rather than waiting for someone else to start a conversation, and say, 3 times this week I'm going to initiate a conversation because I want to be more comfortable speaking up. Not that that's about anything controversial, because I just want to be more, able to speak when I want to speak and get over that little anxiety that I feel. And then assess, how did I do? How did that go? Set little goals, and then you can stretch them a little bit more. And if it doesn't work, don't beat yourself up. And the most important thing, Tolstoy said, true life happens when tiny changes occur. And so does this guy. Focused incremental changes add up to real change. Approach it with an attitude of playfulness, like a sport. Like you want to lift weights, so you lift a small weight, you get good with that, then you lift a little heavier weight. You don't go to the heavy weights right away because that will hurt you. So the components of assertive communication, the Superman pose is where this comes in. No, but this, you're not doing that externally, but unless you're me. But I don't do that externally, I just did it for you. But it involves, sort of a visceral sense of connection to yourself, to be in your body, to feel, to make eye contact, to speak up with, saying the word I to another person. And the tone of voice is also very important. Like, if we can keep a moderate, that's where the voice memo thing comes in. Honestly, if you hear yourself sounding either shrill or, I don't want to bother you, but I don't, if you wouldn't mind, or I'm sorry, that's, you'll hear yourself, like that. You might not find yourself getting what you want in life, So just that tone of voice, kind of right there in the middle. Like this guy said, you can do the play in French without my songs. Very even. And assertiveness is most appreciated when it's in the service of the team, says this executive coach, who's quoted in this article that's coming on the next slide, I think. We can be for ourselves. It's very important to be for ourselves. at the same time, to not be only for ourselves. So when we're for ourselves and we're also for the team, you can really get people behind what it is you want. So that's the emotional intelligence component would be to say, if I can persuade people to my thinking because it's good for the team, then that works for everybody. So what's good for you might also be very good for the team, but that's a great way to frame it. And the basic difference between being assertive and aggressive is how our words and our behavior affects the rights and the experience of other people. And successful assertiveness would work for everybody. It would not, it might be that you win and the group wins also, or nobody gets hurt. It might be that things change, but nobody gets hurt in the process. And Buckminster Fuller, who I like to read his stuff, I thought this was a good way to conclude. But never forget that you are one of a kind. Never forget that if there weren't any need for you and all of your uniqueness to be on this earth, you wouldn't be here in the first place. And never forget, no matter how overwhelming life's challenges and problems seem to be, that one person can make a difference in the world. In fact, it is always because of one person that all the changes that matter in the world come about. So be that one person. And in this case, of course, we're talking today about asserting yourself for yourself, but there's also the asserting yourself for civil rights, for social justice, for the good of society, for things to change. And we can do that. You can practice these skills and feel more comfortable taking stands, and to think that I can be a person who makes a difference by learning to do this for myself. There are many more rights than this, but you always have these rights. I mean, it's just kind of good to review that I have a right to change my mind. I have a right to disagree. I have a right to put my needs first. I have a right to ask questions, make mistakes. I have a right to my opinions, to have fun, to privacy, time alone, to ask for help, to praise myself, to ignore the advice of others, to say no, and to be myself. This is the code. If you really want to ask for something, the idea would be take this, write it down, what you feel, when this occurs, when you're late. It really slows the group, like I feel resentful when you're late. It slows the whole work of the group down. We have to fill you in. We have to get you up to speed because we want you here, because we want you're important to us. What I would like is for us to either change the start date, change our meeting time so you could be here, or tell us what, I'd like you to be here on time, and in the future, let's negotiate. So a healthy negotiation might put the other person on the spot a little bit, but you're putting out there what you want, why you want it. So this is all, you'll get this PowerPoint, so you can just use it it's a great frame if you're rehearsing what you want to say, actually. So that's that. And this is your Employee Assistance Program through Nancy. And that's that. Thanks, everybody.